Today, we're heading to Berlin to explore a palace that started as a personal gift and later became one of the most important royal residences in Prussian history.
Charlottenburg Palace has seen philosophers debating in its gardens, played host to powerful families and kings, and destruction during the Second World War that nearly erased it entirely.
It's a place of love and ambition, of music and architecture, and surprisingly strict rules about how to walk, dress, and even speak.
And of course, we'll also answer the most important questions. Can you get coffee and cake there?
Yes. Hello, we're Lilith and Lara here with Coffee, Cakes, and Castles, where we will be covering the 20,000 to 25,000 castles of Germany. We'll be talking about historical facts, myths, legends, and drama. I'm Lilith from America.
And I'm Lara from Germany. And today we're in Berlin at Charlottenburg Palace, one of the largest palaces in the world. At first glance, it looks like a classic European royal palace, but its origins are much more personal. This palace was dedicated to just one person. So let's dive in quickly before we get to that special person. Let's talk about how to visit. Charlottenburg Palace is located in Berlin on the Spree or Spree River. It's in the Charlottenburg-Wilmersdorf borough and is easily accessible by public transport. And visitors can reach it by U-Bahn, bus, or a short walk. And tickets typically range from around 12 to 17 euros, depending on access. And you can get combination tickets, and they include multiple sections of the palace complex. And the gardens are mostly free to enter. So if you don't want to buy a ticket, you can just go and enjoy the garden. And they are especially popular in the warmer months. So people spend lots of time there when it's nice and sunny outside.
We'll get to the gardens in a little bit, but I would think it would be worth it just to see them.
Yes.
Yes, and without further ado, let's dive into Charlottenburg's history. The story begins with Sophia Charlotte, the wife of Frederick I of Prussia, and you may have heard of her eldest brother. We've talked a lot about connections, and her brother was George Louis, who is better known as King George I of Great Britain. And Sophia Charlotte was born in October of 1668 to a prince bishop. She visited France in her childhood and had actually had her hopes of marrying Louis the Grand Dauphin and heir to the French throne. This did not come to pass, and she was married to Frederick of Hohenzollern. So again, with connections, we had our whole episode about the Hohenzollerns. And Sophia herself was highly educated and interested in philosophy and was pretty well known for her intellectual curiosity. She spoke several languages on top of German, including French, Italian, and English. She corresponded with the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and Leibniz. Thank you, Laura. Leibniz, and hosted discussions that brought together not only philosophers, but also other theologians and musicians. She sang and played the harpsichord and was so interested in music that she had an Italian theater constructed. And if you know your classical music, the Opus Number 5 Sonatas for Solo Violin by Arcangelo Corelli was dedicated to her. And if you're not so familiar, I was not, you can find them on Spotify or wherever you listen to your music. And they're pretty beautiful if you want to check those out. In the late 1690s, Frederick decided to build her a summer residence outside of Berlin. And at the time, the area was the quiet countryside. This elegant palace was originally called Leitzenberg, a Baroque residence surrounded by formal gardens, and it was much more modest than what is seen today. And
And
so
how
we,
nice is Frederick to build her just like
yes,
a summer residence outside of Berlin? I mean,
yes, her own summer residence. Yes,
Jamie, you need to build a summer residence for Lilith.
yes, get on that. Let's start building my little palace, and then Laura, you can come visit me.
I would definitely
Yes,
do that.
let's do that. Jamie, get on it.
So, Jamie, I hope you're listening to this episode and now you have like a big thing to do for us or for Lilith, and I'll be joining you guys.
Yes, in my summer residence, my
Mhm.
pleasure palace, as
Yep.
they're called.
And we need a big pond or pool where we can swim and kayak. I really like that. Just some things
Yes,
for Jamie to consider.
if Schloss Nymphenburg can have canals along where their pleasure
Definitely.
palaces are, as can our
Yes.
pleasure palace be.
That's a done deal.
Yes, let's do it.
So let's dive in how the palace was built. And Charlottenburg Palace, or Schloss Charlottenburg, did not emerge from a single building campaign. It was developed over more than a century of construction and redesign. And the first structure, commissioned by Sophia Charlotte in 1695 and designed by Johann Arnold Nering, was a comparatively modest Baroque residence with a central block and residential suites and an oval ceremonial hall, all arranged according to Baroque principles of symmetry, order, and controlled sightlines. And its gardens were laid out in the formal French style with straight axes and geometric precision, reflecting the late 17th century emphasis on rational, disciplined landscape design. As we talked about in other episodes, that was quite common. After Sophie Charlotte's death in 1705, Frederick I was, who was now King of Prussia, renamed the estate to Charlottenburg and initiated a dramatic expansion. His architect Johann Friedrich Eosander von Goethe, who had studied the great European courts, including Versailles, added extensive new wings and created a formal corps d'honneur that reshaped the approach to the palace. Most transformative was the construction of the tall central dome, completed in the early 18th century and crowned with a gilded statue of Fortuna. And this dome quickly became the palace defining feature, which you can see like from far away. Contemporary accounts note that it was visible from far outside Berlin, serving as a conspicuous symbol of Prussian kingship for anyone approaching the city.
Yes. And so unfortunately, like Lara and I have not been to this one, so we don't have pictures of our own. But if any listeners out there would care to share, like please DM us on Instagram. And we can, and we can put them up there and we will, of course, credit you. So Coffee Cakes and Castles on Instagram, if anyone has pictures, because the point that I was getting to, Charlottenburg, it's really difficult for us to like put into words just how massive it is. And when you look at pictures, you can see this giant dome, and we'll get into it later, but also the gate itself. Like it is, it's grand. Yes,
Yes,
it's very grand and very visible and beautiful. And
it is.
also, yeah. And before we move on to more about the architecture, let's just talk for a second about how much Frederick loves Sophia Charlotte. He dedicated this palace to her, but not only that, apparently he had an official mistress, Katerina Reichert, but he never used her services.
Okay.
Yes. And if anyone has seen the latest season of Bridgerton, and Lara, you and I had talked about how this episode kind of reminds us, like, there's going to be some more things that have kind of reminded us of Bridgerton, the idea of like official mistresses and things like that.
Yes.
And we're moving on to the architecture, so let's talk about some of the most important rooms in Charlottenburg. And the interior is also very impressive. So inside the palace, we have several rooms that were designed to impress, and the Golden Gallery is one of the most famous. It stretches nearly 40 meters and is covered in gold decoration, mirrors, and intricate ornaments. When lit by candles, the reflections create an almost glowing effect, and this room was used for receptions and concerts and other major social events, and love seeing a room used in this way.
Yeah.
Yes. Another notable space is the porcelain cabinet. In the 18th century, porcelain was one of the most valuable luxury goods in Europe. And the Prussian court collected pieces from China and Japan, and there are hundreds of porcelain objects displayed on the walls, demonstrating both wealth and global connections of the times. To contrast some of these massive spaces, we also have smaller, more intimate rooms. And one example is Sophia Charlotte's apartments, which were designed for smaller gatherings. So, this is where her discussions and intellectual exchanges would have taken place. And these spaces have a much different feel from the grand ceremonial halls. If you do take a tour of the palace, you'll get to see some of these rooms. And also of note, we have the Palace Chapel, which is early Baroque and is one of the few surviving court chapels of the time to have survived in Berlin.
Yes. And the one question which is always really interesting for us, who lived here? As
Mhm.
we said, Charlottenburg Palace began as the personal summer residence of Sophie Charlotte, who shaped its early identity and whose death in 1705 led Frederick I to rename the estate in her honor. And after her death, the palace evolved into a major royal residence for the Prussian court, especially under Frederick I, who used it for state ceremonies and diplomatic meetings, and Charlottenburg Palace itself being a very impressive display of power. That's why he used it a lot. Although later rulers often preferred other residences, such as Potsdam, Charlottenburg remained important to the royal network. It continued to serve as a summer residence for monarchs such as Frederick William III and Queen Louise, who occupied rooms in the new wing, and it hosted significant events and official receptions throughout the 18th and 19th century. Even when not the primary royal home, members of the Hohenzollern family stayed there during visits to Berlin, and the palace's halls were used to receive distinguished guests and conduct court life. As we said, the Hohenzollerns were moving around Germany a lot, so they had visitors to lots of those palaces, which were quite big and
Mhm.
common in Germany. And Charlottenburg was never solely a royal dwelling. Like all major Prussian residences, it depended on a large supporting community, which would have included household staff, craftsmen, guards, gardeners, clerks, and service families who lived and worked on the grounds. And I have to say, it also reminds me of the Bridgerton episode, or what is it called? The Staffel?
The new season, the
Yes,
season, yeah,
season.
the
Thank you
season.
so much.
Mhm.
The season is all about like the people who work there, and it's quite
Mhm.
interesting to read about it here as well. So these workers sustained daily operations, some serving the court across multiple generations, creating a palace environment that functioned almost like a self-contained town behind the scenes. Because as one of the largest palaces of the world, it certainly required a lot of people to keep it running. And this is
Yes.
so cool to have the connection
Mhm.
to Bridgerton, because I thought the episode was so good, where you could really see who like worked there and they have their own life, you know? You always see just
Yes.
the people who live there, the queens and the kings and the princesses. And that episode showed you the people who work behind the scenes. And I think
Yes.
it's quite nice.
It is because kind of reading a little bit about this, and it really was kind of like its own like town, or there were at least enough people, to to kind of consider that, and they all kind of had their own lives aside from what was going on.
Their own drama and their
Yes,
own
their own lives,
stories.
their own
Yes.
drama, their own stories. And I think we've mentioned it before, like we don't have the history on that, but it certainly existed.
It did.
Because history is kind of filled with the nobility and the aristocrats and the kings and the queens. But yes, there were, they certainly had their own lives. And from what we know of the time, the daily life at Charlottenburg depended on a continuous cycle of work carried out by the palace staff. So servants would rise before sunrise to prepare the building for the day, and this would begin by lighting fireplaces to warm the rooms. Cleaning crews would clean the apartments, sweep floors, dust furnishings, and maintain the polished surfaces to keep up the standards of a royal residence.
Such
I
a
mean,
good
could you
description.
just could you imagine the halls with all the mirrors and the gold and
Right.
having to keep that all polished? Um,
I wouldn't want
so
to do it, to be
no,
honest. I hate
I
like
would not.
cleaning mirrors or glass on windows. No, I don't like
Yes,
it.
especially up to the standards that would have been
Right?
expected. Um, and the kitchens were one of the busiest parts of the household, so they would prepare meals for the royal family and their guests, which required teams of cooks and bakers and assistants working for hours at a time. A typical court meal could involve several courses, including roasted games from royal hens, fresh bread, fish, imported wines, and elaborate pastries and desserts. And every formal dinner or reception that appeared effortless to visitors were supported by a very organized system of labor with servants, craftsmen, and specialists who would coordinate the work to keep the palace functioning and running smoothly. And maintaining the impression of elegance required constant attention, making the palace a place of unending activity behind its refined facade.
And it's so funny because behind those doors, there were some strange court traditions, which we just read about, and we were like, okay. As example, the court life followed strict rules. Visitors could not simply approach the king or queens, as in Bridgerton, you always had to make an appointment, and the queen decided if she wants to see you or not. They had to be formally introduced. Only then they could speak to the queen or the king. And even the clothing was regulated. Different ranks for different fabrics and decorations. And wearing the wrong attire could cause embarrassment. Meals were highly structured and servants entered in order. So just imagine it. The entire
Mhm.
event was carefully staged, and even walking in the gardens could be formal. The routes were planned. So someone planned the rules for walking in a
Yeah,
park.
so it wasn't just, "Let's go on a stroll," like,
Nope.
I'm sure it did happen, but they also had it, like, planned out, which is interesting.
Yeah, and the conversations expected to follow certain topics, but Sophia Charlotte sometimes broke these rules herself, so it was not too bad. Her gatherings encouraged open discussions, and the palace existed between those two things, like strict ceremony and intellectual freedom. That
Yes,
was
and
something important to her.
reading about Sophia Charlotte, like, when we talk about strong women, she was one of them, and she really did encourage intellectual discourse. She wanted to surround herself with philosophers and musicians, and she really wanted to kind of keep that open, discussions.
Yeah, and a bit like Queen Elizabeth in Russia. I
Mm.
don't know if you watched this like series about her, but that's quite interesting because she wanted that as well.
Have to check that out. I have not
I will
watched it
send you
yet.
the link.
Okay, yes.
So moving on to the new wing, we just talked about it. Frederick the First expanded the palace, and the new wing was like a big thing. And one part of the Charlottenburg Palace often receives less attention. The new wing, as I said, the Neue Flügel, the major 18th century edition created under Frederick the Great. And while the original old palace was built in the late 17th century for Sophia Charlotte and designed in the Baroque style for ceremony and representation, the new wing shows a later shift in taste and court culture. According to the Stiftung Preußische Schlösser und Gärten, SPSG, Frederick the Great added the new wing between 1740 and 1747, created new staterooms, and celebrated Golden Gallery, all decorated in the lighter, more ornamental Rococo style. This marks a clear stylistic transition from the monumental Baroque of the old wing to Rococo interiors that emphasized elegance, delicacy, and a more intimate atmosphere, as like smaller rooms and stuff.
Mhm.
And now we got to talk about the man of the hour, Frederick the Great.
Yes.
And we've mentioned him. Let's talk a little bit more about him, as he's one of the most famous Prussian rulers. Charlottenburg was never his preferred residence, and he actually favored Sanssouci Palace in Potsdam. And Sanssouci may have been smaller, but it was also more private and less formal. And Charlottenburg represented something else in the form of ceremony and public monarchy. Frederick did continue to visit Charlottenburg, and when he did, the palace came alive again. There would be concerts, guests, and political meetings. And Frederick himself loved music and played the flute. And Charlottenburg would once again become a cultural center, and it is thanks to Frederick the Great that the palace was expanded with a new wing and the Golden Gallery plus the White Hall. And I just
Yes.
want to talk about it a bit more.
Yes. So with Frederick the Great comes both political and personal drama. He was
Ooh.
well known for his military feats, and as King of Prussia, he invaded Silesia, which began the Silesian War. And if you're like me and don't know where Silesia is, am I saying it correctly? I apologize if not. Um, it's a historical region that's mostly in Poland with small parts in the Czech Republic and Germany, and it no longer exists as it was. It was eventually divided into 4 different Polish regions. And back to Frederick the Great. So some of his other military achievements included the Silesian Wars. Yes, that was plural. And the War of Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War, where he managed to preserve Prussia's status after facing a coalition of Austria, Russia, France, and Sweden. And under Frederick, and I quote, Prussia became the foremost military power in Europe. And
Mhm.
much like Sophia Charlotte, his great grandmother, Frederick was known for being intelligent and well rounded. He's regarded as an enlightened monarch as he promoted religious toleration, legal reforms, civil service efficiency, primary education, and agricultural and economic development. These would help shape the foundations of the later German state, so he was pretty influential. He also favored language and arts and surrounded himself with other Enlightenment thinkers. And as Lara said, Frederick was a musician. Not only was he a flute player, but he was also a composer, and he patronized other musicians. Sanssouci was a retreat for music, philosophy, and arts. And we've talked about the political drama with several wars, but we'll back up to before he was king and talk about the personal drama. Frederick and his father clashed as his father was militant and authoritarian, and Frederick was much more interested in music, philosophy, and French culture. This led to Frederick attempting to flee Prussia in 1730, 10 years before becoming the King of Prussia. He was not only arrested and imprisoned, but was also forced to watch his friend Hans Hermann von Katte to be executed, as von Katte had helped him plan the escape. So pretty grim.
Mhm.
And in 1733, he was compelled to marry Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel-Bevern. While there's no real evidence as to whether their relationships were more than platonic, it's also believed by some that Frederick the Great had male lovers. Um, there's some letters that possibly allude to it, but nothing concrete. And they say that his favorite courtiers were male and he collected homoerotic art. And one man of note that he was involved in, again, no concrete evidence that they were more than anything platonic, was the famous philosopher Voltaire.
Ah, Voltaire.
Yes.
Interesting.
So again, yes. And some nothing was ever concrete, but there are some historians out there who think that maybe there is a little bit more to these relationships that he had with some of these um, influential
It's
men.
like Ludwig and Wagner, right?
Yes, that is
That
who
is
I thought of when and also I kind of feel like Frederick the Great is who it's kind of what Ludwig wanted to be, were
Mhm.
Ludwig more interested in politics.
Yes.
Yes. He just simply was not, interested in the
No?
political side of things, where, as you can see, Frederick the Great, like, very much was, and he was very involved, when we say that he was a great leader during times of war, like, he was there with the troops.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, now
Mhm.
we talked a lot about the new wing, but not in detail. So the new wing, thank you, Frederick the Great, also illustrates how royal living habits changed over time. Later monarchs, including Frederick William III and Queen Louise, used rooms in the new wing as their summer residence, showing that these spaces were designed not only for display, but also for daily life. The contrast between the two wings is significant, with the old wing showing their prestige through grand Baroque halls, formal audience chambers and ceremonial spaces, while the new wing, by contrast, reveals how they actually lived in Rococo room design for comfort, privacy, and a more personal style of court life. Its architecture and surviving interiors demonstrated that even within a royal palace, practical concerns such as heating, comfort, and manageable room size, because if they're smaller, you can heat them easier,
Hmm.
shaped the lived experience of the Prussian monarchy. After Frederick William III and Queen Louise, it would be used by Frederick William IV, who would be the last Russian monarch to live at Charlottenburg. As mentioned, they would reside mainly in their palaces in Potsdam and also the Berlin City Palace or Stadtschloss.
And an interesting fact about Queen Louise, she actually met Napoleon in 1807 at Tilsit and attempted to
Hmm.
negotiate better terms for Prussia after Prussia's defeat in the War of the Fourth Coalition. Even though her attempt failed, the people loved her and called her the soul of national virtue. And
Hmm.
interesting fact about Frederick William IV, he was nostalgic for the Middle Ages, which gave him a conservative worldview, and he actually wanted to unify the German states, viewing the Holy Roman Empire as inspiration. You might also remember his name from our episode on Hohenzollern, as he began the third construction phase of Burg Hohenzollern.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's so
So
interesting. Like the connections, everything is
yes,
connected.
everything
Crazy.
is connected. Um, yeah. And also, again, we have Queen Louise here who met with Napoleon. And even though it did not go the way that she and Prussia wanted it to, like she did her duty as
Yes, she
queen.
did.
Yeah. So, again, another important, influential woman.
It's so funny. You just dive into that stuff and then you get to know all these amazing women who did such a great job.
Yes, because I feel, and we do hear about women in history, but there is a lot that we haven't covered that I like. When
Yeah.
I've definitely heard of Frederick the Great,
Hmm.
but there are a lot of people as we kind of dig in that I never would have known about who were so influential, and I love it.
And me too. It's amazing.
Yes.
So, one of our favorite topics, gardens. I just love it. Like every
Yes.
time we went into a garden, it's just amazing to see how they come alive and that someone just took so much care to plan such a garden. And yeah, gardens are just important as the palace, to be honest. And originally designed in the French Baroque style, they emphasize symmetry and control, as I said in the beginning. There were straight paths, geometric layouts, and carefully trimmed hedges. And later, parts were redesigned in the English landscape style. This introduced winding path and natural scenery. The result is a mix of two different philosophies, and it was more control over nature and an appreciation of nature. Walking through the garden is like walking through changing ideas in European history, and I think that is so beautiful.
Hmm. And because we've seen that in some of we didn't get to walk through this garden, and I'm very sad about that.
Mhm.
But we did get to walk through Schloss Nymphenburg and the Flower Island in Delmina. And you see kind of these beautiful spaces that you don't necessarily think about it, but they have been very carefully planned out and curated and done with intention. And that has changed over time, as we just heard. Okay. And other notable areas of Charlottenburg Palace include the large orangery constructed under King Frederick I. It was built as an elongated one-storied Baroque building, and though it's called the large orangery, it is definitely much larger than I was expecting before I looked at pictures. So yes, like go Google Charlottenburg Palace, look at
Mm.
pictures. Also, when you do that, Google the large orangery because it is absolutely massive as well. And I was my mind, like, that's not the scope that I had in mind when I looked it up. It was home to an extensive bitter orange collection and protected them during the winter months. It was also used by the Hohenzollern family for balls, receptions, and weddings, and the grounds are also home to the Belvedere, or the small garden palace, which was constructed by King Frederick William II.
Yes. And now to a more sad part, the war and reconstruction. Reconstruction is good, war is not good. During World War II, bombing raids destroyed large sections, including the dome central section and several rooms, and the new wing was heavily hit as well. And the Belvedere was completely decimated. And after the damage, there was a debate about what to do. As we talked about in other episode, there's also lots of discussion. Are we going to rebuild? Are we going to leave it in ruins? But some wanted to demolish the palace entirely, while others argued for reconstruction. And the decision was made to rebuild. Using historical records and photographs, the palace was carefully restored. And the orangery was also restored, and the Belvedere's exterior was rebuilt. This process took decades, ultimately preserving the memories of Charlottenburg Palace. And I thank them so much that they did, because now you and me, we can go and see this beautiful palace. I can't wait. And orangery, I really want to see it myself.
Yes. And Charlottenburg is full of small details that you might overlook. One example is the alignment of the main axis. And if you stand in the central courtyard and look through the palace toward the gardens, everything lines up perfectly thanks to the Baroque architecture and the use of lines to guide the eye. Another detail is the use of mirrors inside the palace. More than just decoration at the time, mirrors amplified candlelight, making rooms appear brighter and larger. And remember, this was before electricity, and it had a huge impact on how spaces felt. Doors are often arranged in straight lines so that when they're open, you can see through multiple rooms at once, and that created a long visual corridor. And even the height had meaning, so higher ceilings were reserved for more important rooms, and lower ceilings indicated a more private space. So as you move through the palace, pay attention, especially the Baroque ones, like the ceiling heights, because that was also intentional. And if you're really paying attention to details, you might be able to spot marks on the floor from furniture that stood in the same place for decades. There might be slight differences in the wall color where paintings once hung, and restoration details that quietly show which parts of the palace are original and which were rebuilt after the war. It's something that most visitors might walk by without noticing. Now that I know kind of what to look for, I think I'll have a better appreciation for it. And once you start looking for them, the palace becomes something else entirely, and you can see a place that was actually lived in. Because, as you visit these places, you are reading and listening all about the kings and queens and the nobles who resided there. This was actually used as their home, which very cool.
It's just amazing. I
It is
just love
amazing.
it. I love
Yes.
everything about it.
Yes, like we get to walk in places that these historical figures did. Mhm.
Yeah, and perhaps not so hidden, Charlottenburg Palace weaves classical mythology into its exterior architecture, and the palace's original Baroque facade was lined with statues along the cornice, a common feature of the period that typically drew on Greek and Roman gods, heroes, and allegories. And at the entrance to Charlottenburg Palace, you are greeted by two dramatic bronze warriors, Baroque versions of the ancient gladiators, and each one stands on a gated pillar, shield raised, frozen in a mid-combat. So they are known as the Borghesian gladiators, and they set the tone of the palace immediately with their heroic imagery.
So if you can imagine massive gate, these gladiators, and then the massive dome, and then huge wings, that is Charlottenburg.
Crazy.
It is. It is amazing. And now for the most important question, is there coffee and cake in this castle? And while you will not find a cafe inside the historic palace, you can find a cafe, the Kleine Orangery, in the palace gardens. And of course, this is Berlin, so you can find plenty of cafes outside the palace grounds as well. And I think I actually sent you something on Instagram about the Berliner Kaffeerei Roastery.
Mhm.
Yes, that one looked pretty good.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then I remember telling Jamie before we went on our trip because he was asking, "Can you look up places to go, like places to eat at, things like that?" And I was like, "Oh no, like we will walk the streets and we will find them because there's
You have to walk the
coffee,
street and see, yeah.
pastries, cakes, yes,
Yeah.
like
As
several
we did,
places."
like, on our trip, as we did, we walked by and saw stuff we thought
Mhm.
looked good and went in there, and most of the time we were really lucky.
Yes. Found some good
So,
places.
yeah, Berlin is full of good places to eat and drink, so just
Mhm.
enjoy yourself while walking through the palace. And Charlottenburg Palace may have begun as a gift, but it became much more than that. It survived destruction and was rebuilt, and today it stands as one of Berlin's most important historical sites. Yeah, pretty
And
special.
yes, and it's a place where history is still visible in every room and every garden path that you walk on.
Yes.
Yes. Next week, we're heading to Rudesheim on
Mhm.
Rhine for
I can't
several.
wait.
Yes, this one has several medieval palaces. Or sorry, castles, several castles. Yes, because there is that distinction. And then we're heading to the Imperial Palace of Goslar, and we will be talking, about the palace as well as some witches.
Mhm. So much power. Thank you
Yes.
guys so much for listening. It was such a good episode. It was so fun talking about it, and we can't wait to see Charlottenburg Palace. And we
Yes.
are really excited. Lilas just has to come back to Germany.
I know. I started after, we kind of did a practice run of this one, and I immediately started looking up like tickets, entrance tickets, everything like that.
Can't wait. I really can't
Yes.
wait.
Yes.
So
Well,
thank you
thank
guys,
you.
and hear you next week. Bye.
Bye.